Okay, I'll go ahead and get started since I know it's a very busy day in Houston for the arts today, and I want to make sure everyone gets to where they're wanting to go to. My name is Zhaira Costiniano. I'm the outgoing curator here at Art League Houston, and I've had the pleasure of curating these shows and hosting this panel. To my left is Juvana Soliven. She's an artist and educator based in Honolulu, Hawaii. Um, we have May Howard, who is a longtime collaborator and dear friend of mine, and such an amazing opportunity to be able to collaborate for the first time here at Art League together. And then Marisol Valencia, who's based here in Houston. Um, this exhibition is a bit atypical in the sense of how Art League operates. Most of our exhibitions are curated through an open call process, but every other year there's a round reserved just for myself to curate these shows. And I first came across Juvana's work doing some independent research tied to the Manila Galleons and that sense. And even though this was actually the first time seeing her work in person, I just knew um, that I wanted to host it here in Houston. And then Marisol, I was introduced to through the PAC residency. I was actually visiting another artist and heard her talk about her Lufa series and was got my gears turning. And so I thought, what an amazing opportunity to host a round of exhibitions that kind of explores a lot of pressing issues in Houston through the vehicle of craft. So this exhibition dealing with bodily autonomy for women, and then Marisol's work also dealing with immigration in that sense. So I'll pass it on to May to introduce the panel a little bit more.
Sure. Well, thank you, Zara, first for inviting me to be part of this panel. I really admire your work, Juvana, Marisol, so it's a real gift to engage in your practices and work today. Before we get into the questions, we wanted to just briefly outline some of the topics and themes we'll be discussing today and say a bit more about the title of the panel. And can everyone hear this okay? I just want to make sure. Okay. So in brainstorming ways to bring Marisol and Juvana's work together for this panel, both Zhaira and I were really drawn to the political context and the work. And so through this moderated discussion, both Zhaira and I will be asking Marisol and Juvana questions about their respective exhibitions. And hopefully through our conversation, we can begin to chip away at or illuminate this relationship between craft and politics. And I think a good place to start is actually by offering some parameters around the word craft, because when I say craft, a few things may come to your mind. You may think of traditional artisanal objects that are rooted in cultural practice. You may think of more commercially oriented handmade products that you would find at craft fairs or sites like Etsy. You may think of quilting circles, and of course, craft exists in fine arts contexts, as we see with Marisol and Juvana's work. So craft has all of these connotations, and it can be slippery in that way. But I think this slip is actually what gives craft a lot of its political thrust, because there's a lot of entry points and ways to invite people into it. So craft can be intimate, it can be familiar, approachable, but also artistic and conceptual. And so for today, we will be thinking about the ways that craft foregrounds material expression. So whether that's through clay, fibers, glass, metalwork, paper, and also the way that craft foregrounds processes of making. And so this act of making things by hand reminds one of their own agency. This can be very self-empowering. Craft is also slow. It is labor and time intensive. And this slowness does open up space for collectivity, for community or coalition building, for space to share memory, grief, to just discuss and participate with one another. And so a guiding question for us is how craft can foster political agency. And I think by linking these two things, the act of production, which is often so social and communal within craft, and also the distinctive political expression of handmade things. So if we think, for example, of political banners or posters, from there, I think we can start to consider ideas of self-empowerment or sufficiency or agency. So I'll just say a little bit about the title and then we'll get started with questions. The title of our panel, Soft Subversions, Politics of the Handmade, emerged when Zhaira and I were thinking about the ways that softness is present in both Marisol and Juvana's work. And so we were thinking about how softness relates to material or tactility or touch, the way it corresponds with care work and repair, opacity, so the blurring or softening of material or image and those connotations of self-preservation, and also the body. So Zhaira, if you have anything to add for that, or get into the questions.
I think I'll go ahead and get into the questions. And my first one is for Marisol. I had the privilege of joining Marisol on one of her volunteer-led crocheting sessions over at a Houston-based migrant women's and children's center. And this body of work, which is in the main gallery, was arises from a year and a half of that volunteer work. And not only was it an opportunity for Marisol to empower these women and teach them this method of crocheting, but also I think organically created a space for all these stories and all this community to be built throughout the act of making. So can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and any stories you'd like to share from that?
Yes, so first of all, thank you everybody for being here. And May, Juvana, and Zhaira, it's a real honor to have this discussion with you. Let me tell you a little bit about the project. This project started 2 years ago when I was questioning the direction of my practice. I thought that I was falling into this routine of creating work isolated in my studio and then just applying for opportunities. But I really want to find a way to use creativity in order to benefit others. So since I was already exploring the subject of migration and as an immigrant myself, I decided to volunteer in a shelter for immigrants. This shelter is run by volunteers. It's a transitional space, and they provide food, housing, and even medical services for the people who are just starting to navigate this journey of building a new home away from home. And I really want my volunteering to be as honest and respectful as possible. So that's why I didn't start the project right away, but instead I spent time there listening, observing, and just finding common ground with the people living at the shelter. I met with the women there weekly, and I always bring a volunteer from the Latino community, and we start to teaching them how to crochet, and also trying to create this space of mutual recognition and support. And so suddenly the conversations start to happen, and we have really meaningful conversations of migration, of this subject. So I started to connect those stories and experiences to the objects and the materials that were at the shelter. And I decided to use those materials that were connected to the concept of care, body, identity, memory, and domestic space. But I didn't want to approach the subject of migration from the outside. I really want to be present in the space that the real experience was happening. And I decided also to include other groups that are affected by migration. Basically, there were three groups. The first one was artisans in Mexico that produce the ixtle. It's the natural fiber that you use in some of the pieces in the show. And this community has this dynamic of sending the male members of the families to the United States to work, and the women and the elder people stays behind producing the ixtle. So they represent this group of that are affected by migration from the perspective of the ones who are left behind. The second group was the migrants that were living at the shelter, and they are in this moment of transition and living with a state of uncertainty and uh, maybe anxiety as well. And the third group was the volunteers that were migrants like myself, and we were been living in this country longer, and maybe we kind of have more experience and knowledge of what it is like to live in between two cultures, and we can share that knowledge.
I'd love to think more about the material usages that you mentioned in your exhibition, because you actually have a diversity of materials. So you have the plant fiber you mentioned, but also concrete, there's porcelain, there's also the loofah. And that when I think of craft practices, they very much exist within lineages or continuums of knowledge. And craft is learned, right? It's passed down from generation to generation, hand to hand, tool to tool. And we see that in your work, Precarious Memory, with the repetition of the porcelain braids, where you're visualizing that sort of passing down. So I wanted to ask both you two, Juvana, but maybe we'll have Marisol answer first about the materials you're using in the exhibition and how they function in your work. So maybe you could start with actually the bed pillows and the way that you use the sheets from the migrant shelter.
Yes. So every time that I start a project, I always think through materials and processes. For me, it's very important that they are really connected to the message that I want to convey. It's not only about, oh, let's put this color, or they have to have a meaning and add to the message. So the pillows, right? The American Dream. So, well, I I try to choose that work start with the idea of comparing the American Dream right now and the American Dream in the beginnings. Right? So at the beginning, America was this land that really welcomed everybody and gives them all the opportunities and all the resources that they need to grow in this country. And right now, there's like a lot of obstacles, right? And maybe sometimes it's not that welcoming. So I wanted to put two materials that express these two feelings. So the blocks, the concrete blocks, are representing this idea of stopping movement, of being hard, and literally like the borders, right? And the pillows, because they are connected to the body and to this concept of rest and to feel and nurture and to feel restored, then it's connected to this idea of welcome and that you feel at home, right? But also it has this information of the colors. The colors, the blue represent these the ideals and the hopes that motivate the journey, but also the nostalgia and the feeling of being unrooted. And the orange represent the fears, the anxiety, this state of survival, and this state of alert all the time, right? And well, that's for that one. But
I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about the precarious memories piece too, because that's a different kind of material presence where you're burning away something and you have what's left that's encased in the porcelain.
so when I was at the shelter, as I said, I want to include not only the volunteers that were helping me teaching crocheting, but I want to open the opportunity to share experiences and to give back to the others migrants. So I did this call for donation where a lot of friends and Latino women donate new bed sheets and new pillows so I can replace the old ones at the shelters and use those. So I count 30 beds at the shelter and I used the 30 bed sheets and to make these braids. So whenever I use porcelain in my work, it's when I want to talk about transformation, this capacity of the human being of not only adapt and endure, but to evolve and transmute difficult or challenging situations. And migration for sure connects to that concept. So what I do with the porcelain, it's to express that change of feeling fragile and then to transform yourself from through a difficult experience into something else, right? So because the porcelain goes through that same process. When it's raw, it's really fragile, water and even pressure deform it. But when it goes through firing and goes through this stressful moment, then it becomes really strong. So for me, it's a material that really talks about this concept. And the braid is a very, very important element in this project because it speaks to how a single strand, it's very fragile on its own. But when it is intertwined with others, it really gets stronger and more resilient. And in many ways, that speaks to the migrant experience because when you live this experience by yourself in isolation, you can feel very vulnerable. But when you find a community that supports you and empowers you, then it becomes more stable and sustained.
So Juvana, I wanted to also ask you, because you are using many different kinds of techniques in your work. You're beading, metalsmithing, weaving in some cases. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your process and also the different kinds of materials that you use in your work.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that question. Also, thank you for um, kind of framing craft processes at the beginning of this panel discussion. Um, if I think about like craft processes and how they all started for me, the first person I think about is my grandma on my mom's side. She's the person who taught me how to sew. So thinking about like how craft is inherited. I think about how they're inherited through matrilineal lines. And so that's what I think about when I think about the craft processes in my work. Um, one, one of the things that craft does and how it performs in the work is it performs in an anti-capitalist way. I think that when we think about capitalism and modes of production, we're thinking about the way things can be like quickly produced and just like made as a product. But I think that craft processes act in opposition to that and therefore in resistance to that. So I think that craft processes are parallel to resistant movements. Um, they require time and patience, and they require constant effort. So I think when I think about my materials, I think about that first. And when I think about sewing that my grandma taught me, I think about mending processes. She was a seamstress in the Philippines. And then when she immigrated to Hawaii with my grandpa, she was the caregiver to our family in that way by like mending our clothes, especially like hand-me-downs that I'd get from my cousins. Like they'd be mended to fit to me. So mending is a huge part of my work and the way that I think about it. So even thinking about mending historical wounds and generational trauma, like that's another way that I think craft can mend that. When thinking about the specific materials I use, I do think about strength and how the materials can oscillate between being strong in the conventional hard way, but also strong in a tender way. And I think that vulnerability is where strength comes in for a lot of women, especially. So my enamel in some of the armor-based work, the enamel is like glass, so it's hard, but it's also something that, if dealt with in the wrong way, could break. These glass beads are hard on their own, but they're also fragile. And when put together, they're soft and they're collapsible. So the way that these forms and materials oscillate between like this rigid shape to these soft forms that take on like the effects of gravity, I'm really interested in that tension between hard and soft. Um, Even with the copper chainmail armor, um, it's armor and it's protective, but the way that it falls, the way that it sort of like molds, it behaves similar to me like skin or fabric, and it's porous in the same way. So, like I'm working between like hard and soft constantly.
And I think this is something you're so good at is creating forms that hold tension and dichotomies within them. And so I wanted to talk about your relationship or the work's relationship to beauty and violence. And I'm particularly thinking about the works installed along this wall from your Body Weaponized series and how these works developed from your interest in interrogating material histories of weaponry and gynecology, right? So these forms are sort of somewhere between the spectrum of torture device and jewelry or adornment, because they're undeniably beautiful, right? Like and the color palette and the way they're constructed, and that's very much a part of the work, that it's aesthetically alluring and seductive, and that draws you in, and then you're able to discuss these deeper issues of bodily autonomy or these violent histories of the field of gynecology. Um, so could you say a bit about those forms and how you're thinking about tools, devices, weapons?
Well, yeah. For these works, they're part of a Body Weaponized series. Um, with this, I was also thinking about like metalsmithing and the histories of metalsmithing. Like metals are used to like make weapons, used to make tools, gynecological instruments, but they're also used to make bodily adornments. And there's something that's intrinsically beautiful about that. Um, I love being a woman, don't get me wrong, but there are so many ways in which society will weaponize that against me, weaponize our bodies and the way that we perform our gender against us. And so that's where the idea of body weaponized came from, is like my very essence of being a woman in this body can be something that can be used against me to cause harm to me. Um, a lot of my research when making this body of work um, came from a lot of it was influenced by Terry Capsalis' Mastering the Female Pelvis. It's an essay that unpacks a lot of different abuses in the gynecological field. And those abuses have disproportionately harmed Black, Indigenous, and poor women of color. And I think of that as they're not isolated moments in history, but they're moments that we continue to see today, and how abuses and bodily autonomy rights still impact disproportionately the same people. When we think about abortion care and abortion rights, I come from Hawaii, so a lot of those rights are still protected, but in places like Texas, we can't see that's the case. I think I went on a tangent.
No, you were right on target with that. And I'm thinking a lot about your forms too, and how you mentioned this a little bit with the ways you were talking about specific enamels or beads and why you use them. But I mean, especially with this work here, since we're looking at it, it does convey a sense of unraveling or fragility or rupture. And so I think you are communicating those instances of transgression. And I think that's what's so powerful about your work, is that you are mobilizing the handmade, you're mobilizing these craft techniques to make visible or reveal those histories. So thinking along those lines of transgression and perhaps how to protect ourselves, you're very interested in using the pixel as a kind of visual motif. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, this pixelated sensor motif is something that I started really working in, or noticing that I was working in like about 2020. I'm really interested in the tension that this sensor has in itself. If you see the pieces to the back wall, it's like three graces. It's these like pixelated bodies that are descending. That piece was inspired by Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, who were the first three enslaved women to be experimented on by Dr. Sims. They were experimented on to repair a vesicovaginal fistula. And they were experimented on for over 40 surgeries without anesthetics, without any kind of protective sheets to cover them during these surgeries. And there were women who were not afforded or even like believed to be allowed any kind of anonymity, any kind of protection, any shielding. So I think about the censor as something that is retroactively providing that for people who are not given that at any point, like any kind of privacy or humanity. So I think of the way that the censor can do that, but I also think about the way that the censor can make something perverse and profane when it ought not to be. So many people's bodies are considered dirty or unclean when they look at them unclothed, and that's why, like, when like Christian colonizers would come to these places where people were mostly nude, they would be covered up. That's why we have the mu'umu in Hawaii, because Christians came in and wanted to dress these unclothed bodies. So I'm interested in the way that censorship behaves in both ways. It behaves in a way that protects, but it also behaves in a way that makes the normal unclean.
I think censorship is an interesting transition into Marisol's work because even though that you'll notice in a lot of the writings, a lot of things are left vague. There's no specificity on what migrant shelter you were volunteering at. You don't mention any of the participants' name as an act of shielding them um, from the forces that may use that information against folks. So I thought that was an interesting use of censorship, not outright within the work, but kind of just underlying as well. But I want to talk about how both of your exhibitions touch on these themes of care and repair. We see that in both of your works in many ways, but Marisol, I'm really interested in um, this act of braiding. I know we touched a little bit with May, but I loved how you mentioned the strength that comes out of this act.
Well, for me, the idea of repair is really connected to the sense of loss in the migrant experience. So I wanted not only to find a material that was meaningful, but also a process. And crocheting, it's historical known for this collective shared experience and the way it can heal you, right? Because the migrant, it's always uh, doing or performing these acts of repairing all these losses. There is often loss of identity, separations from families, and this constant state of survival. So they have to deal with these experiences, right? And trying to repair those feelings. And I thought doing the crochet and the braids were a very appropriate process for that. And during the shelter, I realized that a very meaningful way to do acts of repair uh, these losses was by finding support, shared experiences, and finding these spaces where they can feel not only understood but empowered, because this sense of collective care can really transform isolation into connection. So it was not only about the process of doing the pieces, but also this healing process through 1 year and a half of being the volunteer and bring so many people with the same experience.
Yeah. Your comment about the singular strand not being as strong as the braid as well, and I think the braid being a repetitive motif in your work is really important as well.
Yes, and it also, the idea first start with my memories of my grandmother um, waiting for us at her house with the comb, the brush in her hand, uh, um, to do our braids, right? And for her, it was this special moment where you have to be still and not talking. So she really passed a lot of information or like meaningful knowledge that she wants to say, right? Um, so I said, this is the way I want to go, because usually the migrant, when we arrive to this country, we hold on to the things that make us feel secure, and that's memory, that's identity, um, but also a way to repair these losses. It's about to learn how to let go, because I really think that in every new experience, even if it feels painful or difficult, there's like a hidden gift for you if you are able to let go. For example, if you are feeling this stress of being away from your family and feeling very lonely, then if you let go the pain, you can find the gift that being independent, to create your own values, your own ways to process life. I mean, I talk about all this because that were the conversations that we were having at the shelter, and connecting, the braids with them. They were already sharing all these stories with their grandmothers, with their memories, and you can see the repairing process as well.
And Juvana, I'm really interested in the how your gauntlet work was created for the Japan show, and talking a little bit about those spaces and acts of survival and repair.
Thank you. Speaking of putting work into context that like it could potentially have a greater impact. Um, I made this work in the back corner, gauntlet, in response to like what I observed when I traveled to Japan. Japan and some other countries, they have these designated pink spaces that are made specifically for women. So in some of the train cars or subway cars, I noticed that there were pink cars. Only women could be in them, and that was in order to protect them from sexual harassment. But I often saw men enter these spaces with impunity and still continue to enact acts of like sexual harassment. And I saw that a lot on social media. Some influencers would just go onto like these train cars and like show that they can take up space in these places designated for women. And so I thought about like the way that we always have to sort of navigate spaces when we're walking around to like always be on the defense to protect ourselves from harassment, whether it's like putting keys in your knuckles so that you have a makeshift weapon, or just like not having AirPods, is that what they're called? AirPods in when you're walking down the street or going to your home, or making sure that you're taking an alternate route to go home when you have to like get uh, get to your place after work. So I thought about how the gauntlet exists, one in the work, because like an armored glove is a gauntlet, but the gauntlet for women or femme people or queer people exists in public space. Gauntlet as a way of like this series of challenges that you're going through. So I like playing on this language as well, like what the gauntlet is. And so I made this as a response to that, how we have to navigate public spaces, and how like even though our governments like try to create these designated safe spaces for people, it's really putting a bandage on a wound rather than addressing this patriarchal violence that supports this violence to continue happening. So I think of these as like these defensive objects in public spaces.
I think the usage of this fleshy pink as a bandage is really important as well, painted throughout. I know we have a lot of gratitude to share, but I think I want to hold that till after the questions, since I see a lot of artists and craft appreciators in the crowd. And so I want to make sure we leave some time for some meaty questions out there. So I will pass the mic along to folks who have questions, and that way they can, yeah, I'll take this one. So does anyone have any questions to start off? You know, we can just, oh,
One of the things that you mentioned at the beginning was the idea of craft marking time, and the way that craft sort of saves that labor and embodies that labor, and whether that's communally happening or happening in the studio when you're working on your own. And I wondered, Marisol, Juvana, could you both talk a little bit about that?
God, time. Yeah. I think a lot of that time feels meditative. I think it's also like something that you continue doing despite yourself when it takes so much time. But I think of that also parallel to resistance movements is that like all of this takes time. In the time that I'm taking to make this, I'm not creating more harm in the world too. So I think of that as well. Like I'd rather be in the studio than harm anyone. And I think I'm accomplishing that. Um, yeah, and I think it just a part of it is a meditation on like the sort of endless fight and the consistent effort that we need to um, build a world that we want to build. Um, I think all of those things are part of that, like part of that process.
For me, I relate time with the handmade process. For this project, I was reading books by Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who was a peace activist. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King, and he spoke before the Congress of United States and Europe. And what moved me the most from his philosophy and was the simplicity of his teachings and how I linked it to my project and handmade processes, because he encouraged people to be fully present and connected and slow down in every single activity in your day. And handmade processes and all this project really connects to that, because it gets you engaged with what you're doing, engaged with the people that you are working with, and get to practice patience, concentration, attention, and that is actually talking about slow subversions and politics and the handmade. I think to be fully present and to be able to be aware of your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and most importantly, to your reactions, and make things with intention. And that really takes time, right? To give time to each activity. That is for me a very poetic way of form of subversion, right? To do handmade process.
What is the meaning of 30? Why
Of
30,
what?
30 pillows, 30?
Oh, sure. So when I was at the shelter, I count the beds that they have, and they were 30. They usually have mattresses in case they need more. Sometimes they come a family of five, and they need to put mattresses in each room. But there were 30 pillows. I mean, 30 beds. So I work with 30 bed sheets, 30 pillows. And when I was trying to find out how long I want to uh, go with the Ixtle, I researched how long, no, how tall is the wall at the border, and it's 30 feet long. I mean, tall. So I was like, this is a great coincidence. Coincidence. So it's because of that, the 30 beds that are at the shelter.
Other questions?
Earlier, you touched on craft and the handmade being like a rebellion to capitalism, being inherently anti-capitalist. And I agree with that, of course. And I'm a ceramicist myself. But one thing I struggle with a lot, and I'd like to hear y'all's opinions and takes on this, is like pricing our work. And it almost feels like sometimes are these handmade objects that we spend so many hours and all this love and labor goes into it, but then it's like not accessible to everyone. Like my mug costs $50, but then at Target it's $5, and I guess and I want it to be accessible to everybody, but sometimes it just isn't. So what are your thoughts on this, and how can we reconcile it? That's like really hard, but just tell me your thoughts.
Zhaira, no, that's true for sure. No, it's a reality. Like, for example, for me, that happens with ceramics. I only if you are a ceramicist, you can really know the struggles, that it's to create even a single mug, right? And for sure, it's it's not the value of the work, and the processes sometimes doesn't match the economical value. But I guess when you create, you have to just not think about it, right? I tried not to think about to count, because I know so many people like count the hours, the materials and the rent for the studio. I honestly never do that. I just try to create and then try to minimize the how do you say the cost somehow. Right? Was that the question, right?
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that in a way that feels good. I do feel like I have like a compartmentalized practice. I am an educator as well, so um, when I teach like certain techniques, I'm also making rings and just like casting them, and those are the things that I sell that are accessible. And so I think because I have like the big exhibition practice and also like commercial practice, I can rationalize like the cost of things. Um, ooh, that's a toughie though, because I also have been lucky to be like have my work um, acquired by public places, and those collections tend to be willing to pay a bit more and pay what I feel like okay, like I feel solid about how much I'm getting for that. Um, I guess I price based on what has sold and like try to relate time to that. But also I lose time all the time, like we were talking about it last night that like when I'm working, I'm listening to like Dungeons and Dragons actual plays, and those are like 3 hours at a time, and I'm not working consistently for the whole time. I'm like dialing into some of the role play, so I don't know. Um, yeah, there's no solid way that I can talk about pricing that feels good right now.
I think you must share what character you play, though.
In my current campaign, I'm playing a non-binary frog that's fighting for Filipino liberation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from a curatorial standpoint, I think there's the time that you work on a specific piece, but there's also the time that went into learning that skill. There's a time for, and like materials when everything explodes in the kiln, there's so much additional time and effort that goes just beyond this one piece. And I think it's important to consider that because, I mean, everyone here appreciates craft. That's why we're here. We're supporters. And, we understand that it is your time and your expertise that draws us to the piece. So I know that's really hard to balance, but I think um, from my standpoint, I'm like, protect your value in that sense and don't sell yourself short. I think a lot of us try to do that. Um, it's also important to really value all that time and effort. Question? Okay. Well, oh,
Hello. So my question is about uh, your thoughts on, well, both of you have soft materials in your installations, and thinking about installation, I wonder what your ideas for when you were conceptualizing your installations, what are your thoughts on uh, their presence beyond this particular space? Like, I'm curious about like uh, what other arrangements and such will affect the interpretation of your works. And I just wanted to know kind of your thought process about that.
So I think the piece, yes, every work needs to really connect to the space for sure. So because they are, as you said, soft materials, they can be displayed in different ways, right? So my first idea of show the long ixtle was to make reference to the two borders, right? The border of the wall and then the natural border of the river. So we thought to hang a part from the ceiling and then let the other part on the floor. But it was not looking, the proportions were not right because of the height of the ceiling. It didn't have this feeling of the two borders. So then we realized if you just uh, put the cinder blocks as a symbolism of the artificial border that is between the United States and Mexico, and then the braid as the river that is the natural border, then you can have it was better for this space, especially for the height of the ceiling. So yes, it's a good thing that you can maneuver the materials. So actually, the pillow, the ones from the pillows, at the beginning I thought to just make one straight line with the 30 pillows, but again, because of the height, then I have to distribute it in columns. But I guess it looks fine in the space.
Thank you. Um, you're asking about like how we think about installation when it exists past this space, right? Um, okay. Yeah. Mm. Well, the these pieces they've been made like over the past 5 6 years. So they've already existed in multiple iterations and in multiple um, display modes, more or less the same with like the hanging structures. Um, but sometimes I do have a sort of divorce process when it comes to like how it is installed after my life with them is completed. Um, Especially when you think about how something will exist in someone's home, you have to kind of release that self in that work. So sometimes like I'll send work to like a gallery and say like, hey, like be creative, display it how you want to, and then I'm inspired by how they choose to display it. And sometimes with other paperwork that I've had, they've been more wild, um, like where I would kind of neatly place something and coil something up on the floor in like a condensed pack. Like someone else would have like a freer hand and then just kind of toss it over something, and that's cool to me, um, because I really romanticize the life that the work has after me, after it's left me. Sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
I think we have one more. Oh, okay. Well, I think that is a good time to wrap up questions. I know that a few of us have some bits of gratitude we want to share. And so, Marisol, do you want to start us off?
Yes, really quick, because this project was always conceived as a collective, and I really need to acknowledge some of the people. So really quick, this I want to thank the artisans of Mexico that really produced the Ixtle, also the people living at the shelter, as I said, that are living really moments of uncertainty, and they were really open to share his journey, their journey with us. Also, the volunteers that were helping crocheting, especially Monica and Luz and Miriam, please, thank you. And also the volunteers that are permanently work at the shelter. They really show me with their example how to open my heart and my mind in this matter of migration. And I think
Well, I'll thank people. Thanks, 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 May, for joining us in
See how
this
I
panel
set this up?
discussion. Yeah, thank you for this, to open up this space so that we can have these discussions. Um, God, what a hard discussion to have, right? Um, and Zaire for finding me and entrusting me with the space and entrusting my vision for the space. I really appreciate you reaching out and having me here. Wow, Houston's been so nice. You guys have been fabulous and have really, I've felt like a very warm welcome here. So I'm really grateful for all of you here. Art League Houston, thank you, Art League Houston, for the support. And I want to thank my friends who are here in Texas. There's Melanie James, who is also an artist. Jay Rivera-Ponce, who's an artist. Laura Konechny and Nate Ditzler, who are coming in from Corpus Christi, artists. Thank you for applauding them. They're all like lovely. Look them up on Instagram and also be impressed by them. I love you guys. Also, yeah. Thank you. What's up?
Well, I just wanted to briefly say that this is Zhaira's last public program at Art League. So if you could join me in celebrating her, and she's left such an impact on the Houston community. And I know Jenny also wanted to say a few words on your departure.
Well, I just want to take a few minutes to just talk about the impact that Zhaira has made on Art League over the past 3.5 years. Um, I feel like Art League is moving into its 78th anniversary, and the exhibition program has never been stronger. And it's 100% due to all the effort that Zhaira has put in and just the amazing artist-centric perspective that you have. The shows, when I was looking back at the calendar on how many shows she's worked on 12 rounds of exhibitions and she's worked with 37 artists, and her focus has really been on the experiences specific to Texas. So looking at themes ranging from immigration to body autonomy to environmental change. And she's a curator that is on the rise. And so I'm going to really miss her. The organization couldn't be more thankful for everything that you've done. And we're going to miss you.
I was setting up this round of gratitude so I could share my gratitude. I really wanted to take the opportunity to just thank Art League so much because it's so important to have spaces like this. And the only reason why I was able to curate the shows I was able to curate was just because
I have the platform and support of Jenny, of the board, of our amazing staff here. And so I just have so much gratitude and appreciation for this space, and will remain just such a steadfast supporter of Art League. And so much gratitude for Houston too, because a lot of you know I'm not from here. I'm actually from your rival in Dallas, and was met with a lot of hesitation in that sense. So I have found so much appreciation to be welcomed, and I've always said that I find um, what I love about Houston is that in order to live in such an inhospitable environment, you really need great community, and that's what I've really found here. So, thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks for trying to like navigate the art space, just like trying to get people in. Can I give you this? Yeah. I just don't want people to like fuck it up.